we're going to take up a number of housing issues, starting with the Housing Initiative Fund and Housing First. This is a joint committee meeting of Fed and HHS, and then we will turn to a discussion on services to end and prevent homelessness. And then we'll break and the Fed committee will continue. So Linda's worked thoroughly. It's a big day for you, Linda. You've got quite a number of memos due on one day, and so why don't let's bring up our executive branch team here: Tim Getzinger and Vicki Buckland, Stephanie Killian, Amanda Harris, Puffin Salem, and Linda, you can start us through. Actually, I didn't get it, but
when you send them, have them staff send them to my house.email as well.
Okay. So your first packet is items number 1 and 2, which combine both the operating budget request for the Housing Initiative Fund as well as the capital budget amendment that relates to the Housing Initiative Fund. And I thought that since this is our first time for many of the council members to go through this, I might walk you through a little bit related to the Housing Initiative Fund, just the background of it. So I just did want to say the Housing Initiative Fund was first established in 1988, and it's in the county code as Montgomery Housing Initiative. So sometimes you'll hear people refer to MHI and HIF. Montgomery Housing Initiative and Housing Initiative Fund, they're the same thing. So just in case you see different acronyms, I just wanted to make sure you knew that. So the original requirement was that something had to be in the capital budget, and that's actually in law. Originally, that was actually a fairly small amount of funds, and the HIF has changed significantly over the years. So now there's a large amount of money that's in the capital side, but there's also funding that's in the operating side. And so I just wanted to say that the regulations allow the HIF to be used to construct new affordable units, to buy and rehabilitate existing rental units that might otherwise be removed from supply, participate with nonprofit and for-profit sponsors of projects containing affordable housing in mixed income developments, make loans for development or rehabilitation, and also provide rent subsidies to low and moderate income tenants. The regulations give a lot of discretion, even within that, to the director of DHCA to fund projects and services that are appropriate to sustaining affordable housing and keeping people in affordable housing. So there is latitude, which has been helpful because, frankly, the law itself, it hasn't been changed really since the beginning. But the program of how we deal with affordable housing and services to the homeless has expanded and grown and has all different kinds of sources of revenues and all different uses of expenditures. So the HIF is actually a non-tax supported special fund. And if you'll recall in the overview discussion, when you all were looking at an overview of the tax supported funds, and you saw housing and community development, and it said $14 million or some small amount. That's because the things that are in the non-tax supported funds often don't show up in those overviews when you're only talking about tax supported. So even though there's a large piece of tax supported funding that transfers into the Housing Initiative Fund, the fund itself is considered a non-tax supported special fund. And that allows it to be non-lapsing and to revolve. And in the council's operating budget resolution every year, you actually have a clause that reappropriates the balances of the Housing Initiative Fund so that those funds don't just revert back into the general fund. So I did in your packet on Circle 1 provide a spreadsheet in addition to that information that was in the budget, but also in the packet on page 2, I gave you a summary of the overview. So in fiscal 20, the executive is recommending $60.177 million as what we see called the total investment in affordable housing. And that's the number that kind of comes up at the bottom after a lot of ins and outs occur. But if you look on page 2 of your memo, what I wanted to make sure that you understood is that the debt service for the capital side, which has bonds in it, the debt service is also paid for in the Housing Initiative Fund. And so resources have to be available there. And they're not discussed when we talk about this net total investments. So, for example, for the coming year, if you look, you actually have to have over $70 million of resources in the HIF to net out those transfers to go to debt service and to some other indirect costs in order to get to the amount that's available during the year, which is the 60.17. So I think oftentimes we kind of, as people talk about like what's the size of our housing trust fund, they forget to count the investment we have to make every year to pay the debt service on the bonds that really support the biggest part of our acquisition and preservation. And so there is like another component in there that's required as a part of our trust funds. And, you know, trust funds in different jurisdictions are set up differently. But many do actually have debt service that comes out of them when you hear people sort of talk about the total amounts.
Okay, can I pause you there for a minute? Let's have a little discussion on this overarching issue about the size of the HIF, and because it's a matter of real public discussion, and there's kind of like a scorecard that activists have, and are we getting an A, a B, a C, and it's sometimes I think we're not getting the grade that we're really deserving here. On the other hand, I want to make sure we're always doing more and always doing more. A first question I have is the foregone impact tax revenue, which goes to projects that do 25% affordable, is not here.
It's not.
Talk to me about that. Why isn't it ascribed to this?
So actually, and that's one of the things that I think even in the executive's budget for the last couple of years, there's been a table that's included that kind of tries to total up these other things like the payment in lieu of taxes for non-HOC properties. This is not the impact tax for affordable housing, but the payment in lieu of taxes. HOC also gets a payment in lieu of taxes. And then now there is the impact tax, along with several other funding sources within the Department of Health and Human Services, for example, that comprise affordable housing. So we're well over an investment we're well over $100 million in total investments. And frankly, that doesn't even take into account then some of the other federal funding that we have that comes in through like HOME or CDBG. And so it's really, it's beyond what we have in the Housing Initiative Fund in terms of what our investment is in affordable housing.
Well, could you pull that together, that information?
Right. So the I think your impact tax issue is a good one. And I had taken a little bit of a look. If you look at Circle 3 in the packet, this is the information that the county executive has included in his budget. And so it gets you down to $193 million when you look at the different budgets that he's counting. So.
I see. FY20 recommended $193 million.
Yep.
And that,
So.
interesting. Okay. Now, I guess we don't know offhand what, say, DC is actually using when it says that they're at 100 million. Is that purely just to be apples to apples? Is that just the acquisition funds, or is that something?
So I've not looked in detail at their fund. I think the 100 million is the contribution that's made. I do believe that they have some debt service in their fund. I also think that when you talk about sort of like uses of the fund, which is the other issue, what's the level of affordability of the projects that are being funded through a housing trust, and that can be very different as well. So there's both what's the size of the fund, is the fund large enough to, which this is a question we'll discuss, is the fund large enough to do the projects that you've assessed you want to do, right? Not just what everybody thinks can be done, but like the projects that
It's aspirational and.
projects that the professional staff has, assessed, like they're ready to go, they're cost-effective, they're working to meet our target populations. So do you have enough money in the fund to do that? To date, to my knowledge, we've always had enough funding in the fund during the course of a year because it's a revolving fund and because loan
Turned away a
repayments come
project.
back in, right? And because sometimes DHCA will reserve, they'll make commitments in prior years so that they have the funding when the pay has to come out.
This is the part that's most opaque. It's most powerful if indeed the county is willing to fund any project that rises to the meritorious status. Like,
Right.
if you got a great project, we'll figure it out. That's the best kind of fund to have. But it doesn't seem that is, portrayed. Is there a way we could designate some type of reserve that doesn't involve having to actually set aside cash, but
Well,
it makes the point that there's far more money available than
I think actually I think this has been communicated, and you can see even in the packet the wealth of projects that have been funded, but DHCA in this fiscal year is expecting to close on around $100 million in loans for affordable housing acquisition and preservation projects. There is not $100 million in the net available for uses in FY19, right? So this is a combination of funds that have come back into the fund during the year and can be committed, planning that they've done when they have a project so that they have the funds when they're available. And I would say, in the past, what the previous council has always said is, if you either believe you're going to run out of funding during the year or you have a project, we, the council, want to know, and we would consider a supplemental. And I think the place so for the sort of normal projects that are coming in, I don't have any knowledge that we haven't been able to do what we need to do. And frankly, I would say the place where you might end up with the most difficulty is if you got a couple of really good right of first refusal opportunities that took large amounts of money. But even within the funding we have, DHCA was able to supply the gap financing that HOC needed for Cider Mill, which was a large amount of funding under a right of first refusal. So really the funding has been available for the projects that DHCA, this is my understanding, that DHCA has vetted and believes are ready for a commitment, and they can speak to that as well.
Okay, well, let me ask DHCA to respond. There's just such a disconnect, because we're constantly being asked to increase the HIF, and I think we should increase the HIF. At the same time, we have this posture that, we'll fund any project that is a great project. So that posture doesn't seem to be accepted externally, or else there's just some other dynamic at play. But can we just hear from Director Getzinger?
Thanks. Tim Getzinger, Acting Director of DHCA, and I think what Linda has portrayed is accurate, that it is in fact a revolving fund. Some years we have more funding available to commit than others, and we have been able to fund all of the projects that are ready to go. And that's really what needs to be stressed, is that some advocates may be advocating for more funding for projects that may not be ready to go or have not gone through all of the different financial feasibility reviews that would really give us a project that is viable and ready to fund.
Do you ever have to say to projects, listen, come back to us and, we see that you're ready to go, but, we need to wait another 6 months until some of our revolving funds come back in?
I have not seen that, no.
You haven't had to do that in your experience. Stephanie Killian?
No, we generally can figure, this is Stephanie Killian, Chief of the Division of Housing in DHCA. We can work our funds so that we can meet the needs, immediate needs of an organization. Sometimes you'll hear, as Tim was saying, where organizations are wanting a firm commitment of funds where projects 2 or 3 years out, especially if they're looking to compete for funds from other sources, especially 9% tax credits at the state. We've analyzed the requirements of the state funding and have developed a commitment letter now that gives them the commitment they need for the state while still reserving for us an opportunity to finalize underwriting the project and working with the developer to make it one that we think is feasible and is the one that should be funded.
Okay. All right, well,
And that being said, in the last few years, we have had more funds roll over from one year to the other, either because the funding had not been committed or because of a new financial accounting method. Funds were freed up, and there was a larger beginning balance than was expected. Because of those things, we were able to close on the $100 million worth of loans this year. Will we be able to close $100 million loans next year? No, we won't have the authority to do so.
you won't have the,
Funding, the appropriation available to do so, because we won't have those large amounts of.
right, you've committed a huge amount of resources this year.
Exactly.
So there could be an issue, perhaps for the first time in recent memory, there could be an issue next year?
Perhaps.
Depends what projects are ready,
Okay.
right?
And as Linda mentioned,
Yeah,
one of the
does.
issues is the right of first refusal projects. We've had a number come in this year that we have thought were important developments that we needed to work on and preserve the existing, either market rate housing or market rate affordable housing or income restricted housing on properties, and we've exercised a right of first refusal more this year than we have in the past several years because of the unique nature of deals that came forward. Of course, there is one other factor in any affordable housing deal or housing deal in general, and that is development is more expensive these days. So we are spending more on our project, we're spending more per unit. We do try to keep a high leveraging ratio to make sure we're maximizing the uses of our funds, but deals are creeping to be a little more expensive than we like to see, and we're really working to make sure we're keeping those costs.
So we've had tremendous success getting deals out the door, we've hit a real peak, but there's an issue looming ahead now, because we've done so much, we're a little short. So now's the time to talk about adding resources. Is there a council member named Andrew Friedson who might have an idea of what to do there?
Thank you for that. And I sent to my colleagues, and I'll pass if they don't have hard copies, but sent a memo to colleagues yesterday evening in interest in restoring the HIF funding levels through the capital side, through the capital budget to the FY19 levels. We're $5 million short based on the county executive's recommended budget, and I think that fails to meet the commitment that we all have made to really attack and address this vexing challenge of housing that we all recognize that we have. Average rent has increased by more than twice median income between 2010 and 2015. Last I checked, I think last year there was over 32,000 folks on the wait list at HOC who desperately need help with housing. And our rental supply, and I think this speaks to the need for more housing in general, not just affordable housing, but the rental supply, 14% of it has been built since 2000, 14%. 55% of our rental housing stock was built before 1950, 55%. And so if that doesn't speak to the need, our population isn't shrinking, it's growing. The cost of living outside of housing is continuing to grow. And I think that we need to maintain our commitment, and I think we maintain our commitment through funding and through really making this a priority. And so I am hopeful. I think we need to do more than just funding through the HIF. I think we need to grow our economy. We need to create opportunities for private sector investment in housing, because we are not going to be able to solve this problem with HIF money alone and with public subsidies alone, but we need to do our part as well, and we need to help the private sector to get to the point where they can do their part as well, and I think work together with the nonprofit advocacy community, the faith-based community, the private sector, and our government partners to make sure that we resolve this. So I'm hopeful that colleagues would be willing to support a $5 million increase on the capital side in order to get us back to FY19 levels that the recommended budget from the county executive failed to do.
Great. Now, we have Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Jawando. Let's to this amendment, or to this proposal, or do you want to talk about other issues?
Yeah, well, no, it's directly related to this, but it's going in more to the conversation about why we need these additional funds and
Okay.
also about the process.
Okay, can I just clarify one thing
Please.
before you, so Councilmember Friedson's proposal is 5 million more in the capital budget. Thank you.
And my understanding is it would go in the source that's the taxable bonds.
Taxable bonds.
So it would, which just, they don't compete with GO bonds. They're a
Right.
different mechanism because we can't use GO bonds to fund non-government developments. And the cost associated with adding taxable bonds would be whatever the marginal debt service is, which frankly usually isn't much in the first fiscal year, but eventually the debt service would have to be paid on those as well.
So taxable bonds, so it's not a CIP issue.
It's a CIP issue,
Well,
but
there's
not
a
a GO bond.
debt payment issue, but it's possibly a distinction without a difference fiscally, but we'll, maybe a minor amount of money. Great, okay, Mr. Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and let me just first start off by saying that I think it's great that our community is so actively engaged and involved in terms of wanting us to do more when it comes to affordable housing. I see a lot of our advocates who are in the room who work on this work in this space all the time, and it means a lot to them. And so for people to support us in doing a good thing is great. And so the question is, how much can we afford to do? And so I really want to just start off by asking OMB, we did 22 million last year. This year, we're looking at 17. Is there a reason for the $5 million reduction, understanding that we already allocated a huge amount in terms of existing projects, and there's a potential, and the community, I know the county executive was at AIM, and heard directly from advocates in the community saying, we want to do more in the HIF, we want to do more in the HIF. He's not hearing anything different from what we're hearing. So is there a reason why we decided to reduce the amount of funding for the HIF this year?
The CIP amount for FY20, $17 million, is approved based on the full CIP recommendation. So initially, the FY19 CIP recommendation is $16 million, and then FY20 is $17 million. And last year, council added additional $6 million on top of that. So that's why that number increased from 16 to 22.
Right, but the county executive was here. He was one of those people who voted for that.
Yes.
In the increase. So I think he would understand that that's the direction that we were headed. I mean, he was one of the people who raised his hand and voted to support it. I really, and Puffin, I'm not trying to put you in a bad position. I'm just trying to understand, is there something that changed in terms of his support for the HIF? Because if he supported it here and supported the additional $6 million on top of to bring us to 22, why wouldn't he keep us consistent at 22 now? Is there a reason why, or is it just that from a budgetary perspective? Because that I understand. I mean, but I just need to know, is there something I'm missing?
No, I think part of it because the timing, because when we move forward with the biennial CIP recommendation, January 15 at the time, and then when the county executive came on board, we look at both the CIP and the operating budget to look at what is the capacity overall, and then look at what kind of projects in the pipeline to make determination in terms of what it would be the appropriate recommendation.
Okay, no, that's a fair answer. Mr. Getzinger, did you want to respond to that as well?
Sure. I just wanted to reiterate Pofen's point. The housing CIP has historically been funded at 16 and 17 million year over year for probably the past 6 years or so. And really, it was funded at 16 million last year. It was funded at 17 million this year. It's a 2-year CIP. So there wasn't a supplemental, and we appreciate the additional funding. It does have some impact on debt service. It is not GO bonds. It's about a half point more expensive in terms of the debt. So you're looking at 4.5% to 5%. So it's about $80,000 per million that you borrow. If we normally spend about $50,000 per affordable housing unit, it's the equivalent of increasing that to about $54,000. But with $5 million, we would be able to fund one or several affordable housing projects and bring online about 100 affordable units, and leverage about $20 million in additional funding. So I just wanted to be able to make sure I could say that point. But it's a historic trend, and the CE certainly heard and was there. It's just there wasn't. That was after, I believe, the budget was already ratified or approved last year, and it just wasn't a supplemental.
So the previous executive, just to clarify, the previous executive had recommended 16 million in FY19, and then since it's a 2-year CIP, 17 million was in the 6-year plan for 20. The council increased the FY19 amount to 22, which is why it's at 22, and then didn't change the out year, which could have been changed by an amendment, but wasn't. So that's really the genesis of the 17, is it's consistent with the original recommendation last year for the 2-year CIP, and it wasn't changed by the new executive.
No, it's just a consistent trend amongst my view that, again, when you sit here and you advocate for things and then go across the street and do something different, it's just a little frustrating for me. But again, that's not anything for folks to answer. I'll see the county executive in a couple hours and he can answer it himself. When it comes to, excuse me, the HIF and partnerships, I want to talk about how you'll be able to utilize this additional money if we do approve this additional $5 million, but also just talk about the HIF in general. We've been a big fan of, and you approved a project with Cider Mill and HOC. HOC has been a tremendous partner. Can you talk a little bit about what you foresee? Because I know in talking with HOC that they have very aggressive ideas of how they want to move forward in the next couple of years with projects. And so from that perspective, are we setting ourselves up with not having this additional $5 million? I know $5 million is it's not a huge amount in the context, but it helps. And so from that perspective, understanding where they are, their partnership at Littonsville, all the other things that we've done in terms of Veers Mill Master Plan and others, where we know that there's potential that's there for HOC to be a partner. Can you talk a little bit about that, and if you have conversations in conjunction with one of our leading entities? And I've heard from MHP as well, who are also very anxious and want to move forward and have a number of projects, proposals in Silver Spring and other areas. And so there are lots of people that are chomping at the bit. So are we having those kinds of conversations as well when we're trying to lead into the sort of discussion about what we're asking for as a part of our budget?
Sure. You mentioned HOC, but we have dozens and dozens of partners. I think we have probably provided loans to 80 or 90 different entities. HOC, of course, one of the largest ones. I've known Stacy for 15 plus years. We go back to our Baltimore City days, and so yes, we have constant and considerable conversations regarding pipelines and plans, and of course, we have a number of partners, I'm sure, with us behind me, and we have conversations with them in terms of their pipeline. We have a pipeline, and it's chock full of projects that we believe will be ready to go in FY20. And yes, you mentioned the Veers Mill Plan, and that is a consideration. Of course, there's also the Purple Line. And we're seeing a lot of trading in terms of some of the medium and larger size properties there. And so we have an eye on all of the different properties and projects that are going on. The $5 million will help, but yes, there is a lot of activity.
So with that being said, I would just say again, and I'll just close by this, that with that a lot of activity, I would assume that we would put more money in. Because it is an initiative for us. We hear it not just from the partners who are involved in development, but also from our union partners. We heard it yesterday, how difficult it is to live here in Montgomery County. So from that perspective, I think that it's obvious that we need to do more. And so every little bit helps, and so I'll definitely be supportive of the $5 million. But thank you for your great work. The great thing is that you're doing great things that everybody wants you to do more of it. That's actually a really good thing. And so, I know nobody's resistant to additional money, and I know it's difficult because the county executive has a budget and you're supposed to defend and support that. But at the same time, there's always a need for more. And it's very clear in this instance that there's a much greater need than we're going to be able to do. And so this $5 million will certainly help get us there. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You make some important points. I'll join you in saying we're going to be watching this department closely, and we really want to see the progress that you achieved in the last year continue, the last 6 months, continue with a lot of deals. And we're going to be watching how the master plans that the council has adopted are implemented. I think I'm really glad you raised the Littonsville question. There's a huge potential for new affordable housing there. The problem is there's also private sector housing. And the county executive votes against private sector housing through master plans time and time and time and time and time and time and time. And I could keep going for about an hour. And so we're curious how this is going to work out. And we're going to make sure that the council's vision is achieved one way or the other. But I'm curious to see what we'll find out over the coming months. And I hope we don't find out that there are deals that are ready to go, but the county executive is not willing to support them. So we'll find out. Continuing with my colleagues, Mr. Duando.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here, and I had a great meeting with you the other day, and so thanks. I look forward to many, many more. Look forward to also not always saying the previous executive and the previous council. Let's get this year under our belts, and then we can be the previous and chart a new path.
Don't worry, we'll all be old news very soon.
Exactly. That is the upside to it. I'm also in support. I was trying to urge, I'd like to do even more, but, I'm going to restrain myself. I think with the stats that Mr. Friedson suggested, or mentioned rather, as far as the lack of housing, the age of our housing, there's so many unfortunate ramifications. I think I was telling you all, I was at a place the other day where you have people buying older properties and coming in and jacking up the rents, and that's a whole nother set of issues, displacement and affordability for people. You have so many people who are rent burdened and housing burdened, and even if they do have housing right now, and in addition to the thousands that are waiting for some affordable housing. So we just have a large scale challenges. So we're going to need every tool available to access and create more affordability for people. And I think the HIF is one of those, a large and an important one that we have some control over. And I'll certainly be supporting the $5 million unless there's appetite for my colleagues to go even higher, which I'll throw out there. But at a minimum, I think we need to do that and get those 100 affordable units and more. I would share my colleagues' concern that this problem is so large that ideological fights should not get in the way of creating more housing. And I'm all for, I've had already in 4 months some vigorous conversations with my colleagues about the use of and leveraging of county-owned land, which I think we need to do to the hilt for maximum affordability. I'm concerned with the trend of development costs going up and us having to work harder to leverage the same amount of units and put in more money. I think we need to look at that. I'm concerned with how the functioning of our MPDU program is, and I know how can we make that more effective, and how can we work with developers in a different way? How do we get down to deeper levels of affordability? So all those things are things that I care about, but I also think that we need to not be open to working with the private sector when they're ready to do a deal. So I think we need to do everything and all of it, and I commend my colleague, Mr. Friedson, for putting this forward, and look forward to supporting it, and would urge my colleagues to do the same.
Terrific. So I think we have, without objection, support for the $5 million. Sorry, there's another light.
Real quick. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not to impede the process of providing more funding for the important need of building more affordable housing, but I do have a question for DHCA. Advocates have informed me that most of the FY20 projected funds are already accounted for. Can you talk to that?
Well, no FY20 funds have been committed because we can't do that because we haven't been appropriated yet. Yes,
Important caveat, but
we do have a pipeline. I'm not sure what percent it would be in terms of taking up the available appropriation, but we do have a pipeline. We have a pipeline every year, and this year is no different.
thank you for that. Without any specifics, the thought that you've conveyed states how important this $5 million is for new projects that we want and new opportunities that will come across. Thank you.
Great. And to Mr. Dwanda's point, you know, if you burn through this 5 million because you're going to keep up this record pace, you know, let's talk again and we can do some more. This is taxable bond funding. It ultimately, it works into your deals, right? Basically, you end up swapping this out for some part of a loan or something like that. So, you know, we can keep churning through more of that if that's what we need to do. So, you know, come back to us the second that you need more.
If there's a majority of the council here, that would be the policy of this council, right?
All right. Well done. Well done.
Do everything in joint committee.
I know, right? Well, maybe we should add a few items to the agenda.
I'm on a roll, hold on.
Okay. So we haven't gotten that far procedurally, but we've covered a lot of important policy grounds. We're kind of at the top of page 3. I had a request around reporting on the projects in the pipeline. I think this is probably the place to do it since we're there. I would just like DHCA, this report that is in here is terrific. And again, I just want to praise you, to praise you significantly for the work that you've done to get these deals through. Starting on Circle 10, we see a list of closed loans. And, as council members, we're often asked, what are you doing around affordable housing? And here's a long list of projects that are very specific. You can really get a flavor of how much we're doing. I would like to know more about the AMI investments and how the county is allocating funds towards different AMI levels. So if you could, we can follow up subsequently, but I would like to ask for a report and perhaps a recurring report, starting with projects funded in the last 5 years, projects that are going to be funded this year, projects in the pipeline, whether they're senior or whether they're family, and then how they break out at AMI levels, 30 to 50, 50 to 60, 60 to 80 workforce, and what the definitions are. That would be just very helpful for us, because we're often asked, what are you doing for the 38% AMI? And I think we need to know what the county is doing and how much progress we're making.
And to that point, what we've tried to do with this report is to be more transparent and to be able to report on what is important, and we will certainly add that to this report and to other reports, and we'll put this on the website so it is out there for everybody.
Terrific. Great report and great work, really. Congratulations to the team. Okay, Linda, where are we now?
I just run through a couple things in terms of revenues and expenditures. I just wanted to say that the recordation tax, the portion that's funded through the recordation tax, is budgeted to increase. The revenues for this is half of the recordation tax premium, and the law requires that it be used for rental subsidies for low and moderate income households. And so we generally use it in 2 ways. It's a huge part of the homelessness continuum for rental subsidies for permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing. But we also can capitalize it so that units are permanently bought down to a lower level than the MPDU levels. And so the first time that the county did this actually was at the Bonifant, where the county invested additional funding that was available from recordation tax so that there would be units available for households at 30% of AMI. And that, when you can buy them down during the construction, then they're permanently restricted at that price as opposed to having to worry about an ongoing monthly subsidy for someone. And then when we come back to the issue, when we get the report, I think the other thing that is important about MPDUs is just to also understand, and DHCA has information on this, MPDUs are important even at the 60 to 70% level because those meet HUD fair market value rents. And so it's really important to continue that supply so that people who have vouchers or have another way to pay for them that may have very low incomes can actually find a unit that will still be in the HUD fair market range. So there's a mix of things. There's actually acquiring, creating, preserving units that permanently serve a lower income level, and then there's also the issue of making sure we have a supply of units that are within HUD fair market rents so that when we get vouchers, when people have vouchers, that they have places throughout the county to be able to use those vouchers. So it is a combination of things. And DHCA has a lot of information about the income levels of people who are in MPDUs, and many of them do have subsidies so that those units serve households with lower incomes.
That has been a key learning point over the last year as we did the MPDU laws. You know, I think people, certainly I am, and other council members are increasingly aware that when we create MPDUs, those units are accessed by nonprofits, by HOC, by mission-driven organizations that then make them available to residents with special needs or just lower-income residents generally. And so you have to, you know, first of all, it's an important point. Like, we get more units for the lowest income, most disadvantaged residents by supporting private sector development that creates MPDUs. That's an important point. But secondly, you know, that when we create the units, it's not, because, you know, this is workforce housing essentially, right? An MPDU level is kind of your first salary almost. It's a little higher than that, but.
Well, actually, originally, it was, you know, sort of geared around starting salaries of teachers. And when people first started setting the prices, so many decades ago, that was really kind of what they were looking at. What are people coming in the county making as starting salaries as a teacher or, you know, firefighter, those kinds of things. So it's a moderately priced
income.
unit.
It's not
Right.
the lowest income. So we have to take additional steps. And so, you know, it's all connected.
I did actually just want to review for folks, because you may also hear about this. There have been resolutions over the course of years related to the Housing Initiative Fund about the transfer from the general fund. So every year, there is a substantial transfer from the general fund. But several years ago, before we had a lot of these other resources that came into the Housing Initiative Fund, a resolution was adopted that said the transfer from the general fund should be equal to 2.5% of the actual property taxes paid 2 years prior to the coming year. So for FY20, it would be actual property taxes paid in FY18. And that was, it was not to include things like fund balance or other issues. So it is a resolution that was adopted. We don't meet that specific criteria. We've rarely met it. We've only, I think, met it, frankly, once or twice in its purest form. But other resources have come in since that resolution was passed that allow us to reach levels overall in the HIF to meet those needs. So every year in the council's operating budget resolution, we actually acknowledge that these resolutions are in place and whether the county is able to meet or not meet that. If you were to do that this year, you would have to be at a general fund transfer of $31 million. And of course, your general funds, as you know, throughout the budget are used for throughout the budget, whereas there are now, since the time that was passed, resources like the recordation tax premium and certain other, and actually the whole CIP side of the taxable bonds and those other issues that have come into the HIF to make it larger. So I just wanted to make sure that that was on the table in case you hear about that. Sometimes you will get advocacy around this idea of 2.5%. I actually think that this is a good time in the coming months for the joint committee to possibly like revisit the law that's underlying the HIF. It's hasn't been revisited in a very long time, and perhaps these resolutions, and see how you want to, bring your policies up to date so that it's in better alignment with the documents that are in place.
Okay, let's do that. That sounds like a good summer study.
So I also just wanted to say, in terms of expenditures, there's a $1.29 million increase in the rental assistance program, and that includes the permanent supportive housing, and also HOC gets funding for its rent supplement program. There's an additional $3.94 budgeted in the Affordable Housing Initiative, which is really the source of loans and grants in addition to the capital side. There is an increase in personnel costs that are charged to the HIF. $135,000 of this is to fund 2 positions that are needed to support the changes that we've made in the MPDU program last year. When that bill was considered, one of the key things was allowing floor area to be used in place of unit count, so that DHCA could work with developers to possibly get larger units to accommodate families. There were several provisions in that bill that really required DHCA to have more resources to work with the planning board and with developers very early on in the process, as opposed to the end of the process. So I think that is an appropriate use of this funding. And then I also wanted to say, and we'll have this in the Fed committee, in your Fed committee packet, you'll see the regulation around the job description for the non-merit deputy director, but part of that is charged to the HIF, $93,190. So that is also a change in the uses of the HIF funding. And then I just did want to say, in one of the categories that's called other claims, that there is $1 million, and you can also, Fed will talk to HOC, but there's $1 million in these other claims to continue a new HOC home ownership program that started this year, and that would continue, and that would be in addition to another $1 million that is embedded in the HIF for a home ownership program that DHC does in partnership with the state, so that it used to be that county residents who access the state program could sort of have a choice of down payment assistance or assistance with the rate of their loan, and now through the use of the HIF funds, they can access down payment assistance through the county and still get the lower rates that the state provides, and it's been very successful in terms of home ownership. So those 2 things are also embedded in the HIF. And then lastly, this is on page 4 in terms of the operating side, we do fund some nonprofit organizations through a category called Neighborhoods to Call Home, and what you'll see is the organizations are listed.
Quick question, question on the HOC home ownership program. Does that only help people who are HOC clients currently, or is it open to anyone and it's a program that they just offer?
And actually, if you want to talk about it now, we can. It's also focused on people who have slightly lower credit scores, sort of in the 600 to 650 range, and might not be eligible for other lower interest assistance. And so it's really focused on home ownership for people who otherwise are ready to be homeowners, but they have some challenges.
600 to 650 is sort of normal for a lot of people, right?
You want to come up?
It's not that low.
Why don't you come on up?
Yeah. I can certainly remember my own credit score being in that range as a young man when I was.
Just introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Stacy Spann, Executive Director of the Housing Opportunities Commission in Montgomery County. So 650 at one point was a good number, but you'll remember that certainly between when you purchased your at least first home and now, we've had a series of calamities in the financial markets and in the housing market in particular. And so what we see is lenders paying particular attention to credit scores and locking folks out, certainly post-recession, who have great work history, significant and constant work history, but frankly may not have a credit score in the 700s.
Because they may have, oh, no, they got 4 or 5 credit cards, even if they didn't run up balances on them. You know, they may not even made bad mistakes.
If they had to go to school, college or graduate school
Got loans to pay
to
off.
get a job to afford a house,
Yeah.
and, you know, sort of make choices
Interesting.
between what got paid timely and what didn't, then certainly credit scores can suffer. As the United States is very interesting in this because essentially the big 3 credit bureaus are charging individuals and agencies to sell them their own individual information. And the way that the credit scoring works is essentially it's based on either no interaction with creditors or adverse actions. It's not a true reporting of your actual activity. It's all about how bad it is or the limited action. So, and that's, you know, we do everything that way, right? We create no piles faster than we figure out how to get to yes. And so that causes issues when people are looking for homes.
So broadly speaking, though, your program is accessible. And if we hear from a constituent who may be having trouble, you know, getting access to financing for a home buying, we can send them to you even if they aren't already an HOC client, and if they qualify, then they qualify.
Well, certainly, and this is for all Montgomery County.
Yeah.
We serve the folks of this county, and again, I'll say it, we serve folks who are at above 100% of area median on down. And what we're working on is to make sure we're serving all customers equally well. And so certain folks can come to us. There are going to be times when they don't qualify. Our commissioners and really it's opportune for us to be talking about this during National Fair Housing Month. April is National Fair Housing Month. Housing folks who happen to be less well-resourced is at a cost. You can't do it for free. But it is also lifeblood for communities and keeping them healthy and representative of how neighborhoods and families actually work. So certainly folks can come to us. We are, they can go to our website as well. All of our lenders who work with us in this program are there. As Ms. McMillan pointed out, we work as hard as we possibly can to try and move down stream on credit scores and other things so that folks can own homes here in Montgomery County. And I'll just quickly thank DHCA for their indulgence of allowing HOC to kind of shoehorn into there. So thank you very much.
Let's continue. Thank you.
I think those are, I just started to mention the nonprofits that are funded. They're listed on page 4 of your memo. They are all continued, all of them are continued at FY19 funding levels into FY20.
Okay.
And they all assist with keeping housing in good condition or helping tenants with assistance, all those kinds of things. So it's a variety of projects that have come into the HIF over the years, but these are the ones that are currently funded.
So we're presently supporting nonprofits from the HIF to at about 1.18 million. And that's really to provide services to support housing as opposed to acquiring housing or doing construction. So we want to offer the full package, but we got to be mindful about if that ratchets up over time, it eats into, capital that we could use for acquisition. Okay. Mr. Rice?
Just had a quick question. Sorry, wrong way. So I had a quick question just in terms of, is this flat funding from last year?
Yes.
Okay. So are we seeing increases from our nonprofit partners? Have they asked for increases in terms of, as we grow our contingency of affordable housing, I'm assuming that we're also going to grow our need for support services, so.
I'm sure that every nonprofit that's listed here, along with every other nonprofit that's asking for adjustments, would be interested in additional funding. They all do really good work.
Well, did
I'm
they
just
ask?
saying, what's the plan, though? As we increase inventory significantly, and we know that these wraparound services are important, I just want to understand, it doesn't have to be in this budget, but again, I want us to start getting to where if we're growing and we have this huge pipeline of inventory that's coming in, we also need to make sure that we're also saying our plan is that we're going to have the wraparound services to
I
support
think
some of the folks.
So I think some things, so for example, last year, we did increase a couple of these, and in particular, Rebuilding Together has gotten some additional funds, and they
I
help.
thought I remembered us
And
doing
they
that.
do help to, keep older housing up to date.
Right.
Help people with low incomes. And I think the other one, we've talked about in terms of Apartment Assistance Program, MHP works specifically with some of the landlords of small buildings that often may need some assistance in being better landlords, keeping properties up, so they do those works. And then a Wider Circle funding came into the HIF a few years ago in recognition that they were in particular supportive, actually in particular at that time when we first did it, of the veterans housing. They were helping with making sure that people moving into permanent supportive housing were getting some furniture, and that was brought in. So I think each of these, and tenant counseling through CASA is another one, as we have more rental communities. Some of these have had increases in recent years. Some of them are new in recent years, but these right now are all funded at the 19 level.
So, Mr. Chair, what I'd like to ask is that, again, I don't have any recommendations for this budget. I think in the context of the full two-year CIP, when we take it up next year as a part of next year's budget, that we need to have a session to talk about this specifically, because as we're growing a significant amount of inventory, I just want to make sure that the services that we're providing, because that's what we hear about when we talk about homelessness, what happens. It's folks who either live in conditions that are really bad because of what it is, and then are forced out because they don't want to subject themselves to what it is. And again, if we're not providing the support for landlords to make sure that they're doing what they need to, or in some cases where it's, well, with our veterans homelessness, we had this huge campaign in doing that. But of course, thank you to Wider Circle and other partners that are out there who come in and help to furnish these things. As this inventory comes about, that, in all these projects that are in line, these other support services are going to have to grow along with them. There's no way that we can just have the inventory. And so I'd like for us to maybe reconvene and have a work session specifically on this and what our practice should be in terms of us just, instead of just piecemealing. I don't want to piecemeal here today because that's not fair to anybody, right? But I do want to try and make sure that we get a better analysis of what's there.
And I think this also then has a relationship to reforming the community grants process.
Yeah.
Because frankly, right now, any of these organizations also, and many of them do, can apply for community grants, and they get funding through, this is not all the funding
Right.
that these organizations get.
Well, we need to
So,
clarify what the process is.
Right. So I think this idea of looking and then knowing what it is all throughout the budget is probably a good way to do it.
Good talk. All right.
We work well together.
Yeah.
So we do have a CIP amendment that relates actually to FY19. So you all now have amended the CIP for 20 to add the $5 million. But the county executive, in recognition of loan repayments that have come in and are available now, has sent over an amendment to recognize an additional 4.77 that can be appropriated in FY19. And so that's the amendment that actually did come over to you, related to a change in 19 funding as opposed to 20 funding.
So this is repayment to the HIF?
This is part of the revolving funds that become available.
Okay, so
Okay.
then combined with the 5 million, I'm sure the council will support that, so then we'll be $9 million in cash.
So you'll have if you were to look original to original, the additional $5 million will mean that in 19 and 20, each year would have an original of $22 million in new resources. And then this amendment allows the department to expend revolving resources that have come back in for FY19.
Okay.
It's not a new resource, but it has to come in through the process.
Okay, why don't we, just to also close a loop on this overall question, why don't we ask for a check-in 3 months on, because you got a lot of projects out very quickly. I don't know if you're going to continue that pace, or if that was something that kind of cleared out your inbox, I don't know. But I'd like to find out and just keep monitoring the situation. So if we could just have a check-in, maybe Linda, if you can just be, please, in dialogue with DHCA and keep us apprised of whether there's a need for any additional appropriation.
And then the next budget item in this packet, before you hear some more about point in time and other issues related to homelessness, is that each year the council has to include in the operating budget resolution information on the caps for the non-HOC payment in lieu of taxes agreements that DHCA can enter into for affordable housing. And so on page 6, you'll see a table for the FY19 approved, and then what the 10 years would be in FY20. And so the committee needs to make a recommendation on that, and I would approve it as DHCA recommended.
Okay. Any concerns or questions about the staff recommendation to approve the executive's recommendation? All right, sounds good.
Okay. And then we sort of are doing the things just a smidge different this year. Usually, as a part of this, you have some more discussion about what we're doing in the continuum of care and Housing First, and so I have some more, you just had a big briefing on homelessness, so it's a little different this year that way. And then after there's that discussion, we actually are going to move into the budget for services to end and prevent homelessness, is your packet number 3.
Okay.
So I would let Amanda and
I will now pass the gavel to Mr. Glass, and you're up.
Great, thank you, Chair Reamer. And thank you to my colleagues for allowing me to lead this conversation, and I'll let you all know that I do not have any lights in front of me, so wiggle or raise your hand or spitball something to get my attention.
Tweet you.
Tweet. I'm not checking right now. I'm being mindful to the conversation we're having at this present time. So let's hop right into this conversation on services to end and prevent homelessness. So Ms. Harris, would you like to start this conversation? Thank you.
Hello, Amanda Harris, Chief of Services to End and Prevent Homelessness with HHS. Thank you for having me here. Before I talk about the PIT, I did just want to take a moment to recognize our community partners. Ending homelessness in Montgomery County takes all of us. It's not just an HHS effort. I know many of them are in the room, so I just want to do a little shout out to our nonprofit partners, and particularly those folks that are on the front line that are working every day with people experiencing homelessness to connect them to housing. Just saying that. Yay.
Are they? Who is, anyone want to? Yeah, raise your hand. Who's, thank you. Awesome.
Thank you. Great. So I won't spend a whole lot of time since we did just have the briefing, but I wanted to give you some additional information on the point in time. You should have, or you will have in front of you just a quick one-pager infographic on our point in time. Couple things to highlight here. Over the last 10 years, we have had a 46% decrease in the total number of people experiencing homelessness. So we've nearly cut that number in half. Also, the 10-year trend for households with children has decreased by 64%, which is huge. This year, between 2018 and 2019, we saw the largest decrease that we've seen since we started doing the point in time of 23% in 1 year, which is great. The other really exciting thing is we've had a 93% decrease in chronic homelessness, which is phenomenal. We're down to 11, maybe 10. I keep hoping someone will get a house this week. Not sure if it's happened yet. So that's that. Then if I can also draw your attention to this handout on subpopulations. So as part of the point in time process, we conduct a survey on everyone experiencing homelessness, and we ask them some questions. So this is all based on self-report. What is very exciting here is that you will see that there are significant decreases in most of the subpopulations. So you're seeing decreases in folks reporting chronic substance use, serious mental illness, dual diagnosis, chronic health problems, obviously chronic and veteran, which is, I think, largely due to our efforts of the Inside Not Outside initiative to end chronic homelessness, because people experiencing chronic homelessness are likely to have substance use issues, serious mental illness, dual diagnosis, et cetera. The other thing I will point out here is if you look at the line on physical disability, so this number you all have it, right? Oh, sure.
We're going to play musical chairs so
Okay.
I can see
Great.
the lights.
It needs to be in reachable kicking distance, so.
Great.
Thank you, Ms. McMillan. Ms. Harris, continue.
Yes. So if you look at the line on the subpopulations around physical disability, you will notice that this number keeps trending up. We've had a 44% increase over the last 2 years of people reporting a physical disability. What we suspect is happening is that there is a growing number of older adults experiencing homelessness. We don't know that for sure, but that's what we suspect is happening. In the last 2 years, the Council of Governments has started tracking throughout the metro area the number of older adults experiencing homelessness, and we're seeing that the numbers are rising everywhere. Last year, there were 8 people in the metro area that were over 80 years old experiencing homelessness. This year, in 2019, in Montgomery County, there were 2 people in shelter that were over 80 years old. I personally think that's appalling, and that shouldn't be the case. So we are looking to address that. And there are unique needs of older adults that it's going to require different interventions than we typically employ to end homelessness. So they're going to need more than just permanent supportive housing. They're often going to need more in-home support, so personal care assistance, better connection to medical services. So it's certainly something that is on our horizon. The other thing I want to point out is if you look at the year-round and winter bed inventory. So oftentimes when people think about homelessness, they think about shelter. I'm hoping that we can get people to start thinking about housing instead of shelter. Housing ends homelessness, not shelter. But I did want to just point this out for you. This is our inventory, so what we have, the number of people that we have the capacity to serve, and I've also included the number of people that on that night of the pit were actually in shelter. So you'll see for households without children, the capacity was 476. However, we only had 366 people in shelter, which is the first time in a while that we've seen that gap, which is great. It's good. And that's the same is true for households with children. So our bed capacity is 285, and we had 206 people in shelter on that night. Pause.
Sure. So one of the statistics that you shared, the 93% reduction in chronic homelessness, is terrific. And I know that having had many conversations with you and your team, we are awaiting functional zero month by month to see where that goes.
Yeah.
Right? And as we're talking about the budget for FY20, I know there are some shifts in focus or expansion of focus. Can you talk about that as well?
Yes, I will certainly talk about that. We are in the process, the community is in the process right now of refreshing our strategic plan. So around chronic, we feel like we have reached functional zero. We will continue to work towards the federal definition of functional zero, but for all intensive purposes, we feel like we have been successful. We've been maintaining at around 11 or 12 for the last year. So our inflow matches our outflow. But we are now ready to embark on our new mission of ending homelessness for families with children by the end of 2020. So that's where we're focusing most of our efforts right now and targeting any new resources to that initiative. We also, as part of that strategic plan, have laid out some new goals. Our plan is to end homelessness for unaccompanied youth by the end of 2021, and to end homelessness among seniors by the end of 22. So that's an addition. We have never talked about that before, and we have not seen, I at least don't know of any other communities that have specifically spelled out seniors as a population that we should address. And then overall, we want to end homelessness for everyone by the end of 2023.
An ambitious agenda, but
Yes.
if passed as prologue, our assembled team and nonprofit providers and staff at the county will certainly make inroads and get the job done. I'd turn it over to my colleagues. First, want to welcome Councilmember Hucker to the conversation. I know you'll be sharing your thoughts in a bit, but first, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Councilmember Glass, and thank you for your leadership on this issue, and thank you all for being here again. A couple questions. The first, just related to the subpopulations. Well, actually, no, before that, great work. I mean, I think we are on the cutting edge, and I hear it all the time from people in the region and around the country of just the work you're doing. The point-in-time count info is great. So I just want to say that, because often in these conversations, we dive into we're Montgomery County, we want to be better, we want to move quicker, we want to be a model, but we're doing great work, and it's noticed and appreciated, and now we can do more, and we should.
Yes.
So the seniors, I'm so glad to hear the focus on the seniors. I think, having toured several of the shelters, and that is just increasing as we age with the rest of the country, but disproportionately have seniors here. That's a serious issue. Look forward to working with my colleagues on that. I know several have mentioned that. And unaccompanied youth also, that's great to hear that we're going to be focusing in there as well. I continue to be very, very concerned, as I know you are, with the high percentage of African Americans in shelter, who make up 18 and 19% of the population, but somewhere over 65% of the people who are homeless and in shelter. Not captured here, because I know you're not doing any racial or breakouts in this, but could you talk about what you're doing and what you think the vision is, and how we can support to hone in on those issues? Obviously, multifaceted problem, but it's troubling.
Yeah, that's a good question. And we did actually talk about that as part of the strategic planning. So it's not done, the plan isn't done yet. And we are looking for ways to, how do we incorporate addressing the racial disparities across all of these populations? That we need to have very concrete strategies and tactics to address that issue. So it's not just about prioritizing people of color for housing, which I don't actually think we can do because of fair housing. But there are other ways that we can address the disparities. And I think I mentioned before, one way is that we know that people that are Black or African American often have a criminal record, because there's also racial disparities in the justice system, which impacts their ability to be able to rent units.
Right.
So that's a huge barrier, and that's something that we as a community could do something
Trying to work
about.
on that too, but yeah, but yes, keep going.
Yes, so that's one of the major factors. I think also looking at other ways that we can help.
On that point, are there things that we need to, I know some of them might be, in the case, there's some federal requirements there, but are there county things that we could, that prevent either law or policy?
Yes.
Okay, so.
Yes, so Montgomery County already protects against source of income, which allows people with a voucher to be able to go and rent a unit. That's great. That's a huge step, and that does, I think, also help to address the racial disparities. It would be ideal if there was some sort of law restricting landlords' ability to deny people solely based on their criminal background, or have limits on it. You can only deny based on certain offenses, or go back a certain amount of time. I don't have a detailed law
Sure,
right
yeah,
now.
sure.
That's for you all to figure out.
But
But I
basically-
think that would be something that would be incredibly helpful in addressing the disparities.
Well, and sorry, Vicki Buckland, Acting Director for DHHS. Part of it for us some of those policies kind of work on both fronts, both in terms of our ability to connect people to housing, but also more particularly to prevent folks from coming into the continuum in the first place. Because, at the end of the day, if you're really talking about addressing that at the root, the fact is that people come in disproportionately. And you have to address that problem. And some of those policies actually hit on both of those fronts. They both help us address people who are already in the continuum, and they help with some of the prevention as well.
Yes.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And I think you're exactly right. We have to be working on, there's a reason people are showing up homeless. Before they get to your door or in need of service, there's discrimination, there's educational inequity, there's a whole bunch of things, but, okay. So but that's a very specific example that I think I'll want to follow up on and we can work on.
I hope that out of the strategic planning process, we will have other very specific.
I hope so too. Yeah, that would be great.
That's the one.
That'd be great. And the last question, I know we have several people who want to ask the questions. So our nonprofits that are providing permanent supportive housing, and we have many that waived and are doing great work, how are we, do you think, what's your opinion of how we're distributing those dollars? And could we do it in a way, are we getting the best bang for our buck? Are there more organizations we should be utilizing? Just could you give me your state of the field? And we have some great partners, but is the way we're allocating those dollars, do you think it's the best, most strategic and best use of funds?
That is a question.
I know it's a big question.
Yes, it is. So, yes, I think that over the last few years, we have taken a careful look at how we are allocating resources, trying to have more consistency in how we fund similar project types. So that's certainly something that we're looking at doing. We also recognize that not all permanent supportive housing, for example, looks the same. Some providers or some programs have the ability to provide more intensive support services, while others, they're just not staffed that way. So what we are trying to do is look at a way that we can use our coordinated entry system and our common assessment tool to help ensure that we're connecting people with the greatest service needs to the permanent supportive housing programs that have the capacity to serve them, and that the PSH programs that have that can serve people with lower needs are actually getting those kinds of referrals. So we have to create avenues for housing for everyone. So the answer isn't just very intense permanent supportive housing for everyone. That is never going to get us anywhere. We're not ever going to have enough money to do that.
Effective, right?
Yeah, right. It's not effective. It's overprescribing. We don't need to do that. But we need to make sure that we're investing enough in all those other types of resources so that there are ways for people to get out of homelessness. So permanent supportive housing, high acuity, low acuity permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing is certainly where we need to invest more. More than half of the people experiencing homelessness, the single adults anyway, are, based on our assessment tool, are scoring for rapid rehousing. And rapid rehousing makes up a very small part of our budget. So that's an area where we could be more cost effective and just simply more effective in investing in rapid rehousing. And the same is true on the family side. So for families, it's actually closer to 87% of families are actually in need of rapid rehousing. We think that we need about 450 units of rapid rehousing. We have about, conservative estimate is 120. So
Could you talk about the investment amount required for rapid rehousing?
So it's about $8,000 per household. So.
Perfect, great.
We did, so at the ICH met yesterday and made a decision about funding priorities for the HUD Continuum of Care competition. So every year, we apply for federal HUD dollars in the tune of about $9 million that help support our efforts. And so the ICH made a determination that this year for the competition, we would be prioritizing projects that would increase our rapid rehousing for families. So that in that competition, every year we make determinations about where is our need, what are we focused on right now, how can we best use our money. And it's not just about new projects. We also, through that process, look at all our existing projects, and they are evaluated based on their outcomes, their cost effectiveness, who they're serving, and we make decisions about, do we need to shift some costs? Do we need to reallocate funds from one project to another? So we are looking at that.
Thank you. I'll pause there, but I agree with you on rapid rehousing, and I hope we can work on that collectively. Thank you.
Good questions. Councilmember Albanese.
Well, first of all, thank you, Ms. Harrison. Thank you, Ms. Buckland. Your leadership in this space has been really impressive, and we did cover most of the ground at the briefing we had just a few weeks ago. I just had a couple of follow-up comments just based on the context of the conversation we're having here, and I know my colleague, Councilmember Hucker, will likely be asking questions about Progress Place, so I'll defer those questions to him. I do want to express my appreciation for the enhanced security elements within the building and moving forward with that, which is obviously very important. So I think as we expand the initiative to now focus on families, which I'm very excited about, obviously this work is unbelievably complex, and I have so appreciated the systemic way that we have gone about and are many of the reasons why we've had the successes we've had so far. Just to put in a plug, the HHS has had a long-standing great partnership with other sister county agencies like Recreation and MCPS and Positive Youth Development. As we're looking at family as a whole, I think there's an opportunity there for us to be even more intentional in working with those families on providing those ancillary public services that we already have on the books, but we can target a little bit more effectively. So I look forward to partnering with you guys and helping however we can in our office to facilitate those conversations, because I think we'll be able to better leverage resources there. I also want to acknowledge, too, I so appreciate and love that we're setting aggressive benchmarks to achieve. But as we acknowledge, our providers are already under a lot of pressure, and this is complex work, and it's a rolling target. And so I think just particularly as we talk about families and issues of domestic violence and discussing those complexities, I, for one, am certainly very patient here and very flexible in acknowledging this is going to take some time to get this right. And so we stand with you in however our office can be helpful in any way we can be helpful. But I just want to go on the record in commending your work and also appreciate your acknowledgement to the providers in the beginning of your testimony, because I think that's a great thing as well. So thanks, and that's it for now.
Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Glass, Mr. Lead. And let me first start off by saying that I think that we continue to have a challenge when it comes to family homelessness, and one in which I've had multiple conversations with you, Amanda, and Vicki, your predecessor, Uma, and Linda. We've all been involved in really trying to address this issue in terms of what to do when families are homeless. Because housing a person outside of their school district, housing a person outside of where their care provider is for those children is incredibly disruptive. And as chair of the Education and Culture Committee, that's one of the things that we see as a huge disruption that affects the two-generational poverty conversation that we had yesterday. And so all these things are connected and tied together. And so my question is that, and I appreciate and understand we're working on ways in which we can continue to grow that, which is why, or our support for those families, which is why our previous discussion was so important. Continuing to talk about inventory and growing that inventory of affordable housing. But I do want to talk a little bit about prevention, because we have prevention as a section in here, but there's not a lot to it. And so if you could tell me about what it is that we're doing more than what we have done in the previous budget, understanding that our real estate market is actually recovering and getting better. And so from that perspective, it means that folks that are at risk are more at risk. When our real estate market does better, those folks who are struggling, who aren't making a lot of money, are more prone to be evicted, all those kinds of things, because landlords who may have looked the other way and said, you know what, the real estate market's bad now, I'm not going to kick you out, I'll let you go into arrearages more. Now that's not going to be the case, because folks are actually, the economy's starting to recover a little bit, and folks are feeling a little bit better. those things aren't going to happen anymore. And I shudder, I shudder every time I drive by someplace and see stuff out on the curb, because I know what that means, and I know that means the potential for somebody to be homeless. So just talk to me about what we're doing in this budget that's different from what we've done in last year to try and make sure we're staving off some of that concern.
So I would say the biggest change to our process is that we are now using homeless diversion program. So previously, when families would come in seeking shelter, we would basically kind of stop the conversation there and put them on a wait list and wait for them to get into, for there to be a slot open in shelter. And that is no longer the case. So what we're doing now is working with them to help them resolve their housing emergency. So that might be just problem solving, that might be some conflict mediation. Oftentimes we'll see that families come in seeking shelter when they haven't actually been evicted yet. There is an opportunity for us to save that. So we'll call up the landlord and we'll do that landlord negotiation, maybe come up with a payment plan. We also can provide financial assistance. It's always better to keep someone in housing than to have them go through the homeless continuum. And sometimes they're not able to sustain the current housing, but if we can help them find new housing before the actual eviction happens, that's always better, rather than having it just be you go to shelter and then you wait for it to get into a housing program that may or may not exist. So that's the biggest change. We are also having a lot of conversations about how we target our prevention resources.
And our experience has been.
Oh, yes, the number. Yeah, and so what we found, we started in July of this year, so it hasn't been a full year yet, but 2/3 of all families that are coming in seeking shelter are able to be diverted, which is that's significant. And what that has meant is that we've had less need to use motels, which I know you will be happy about that. Our goal is to not have to use motels at all, and we're getting closer. I think we're averaging around 20, 22 rooms these days, where we were averaging more 30, 35. So the other piece I will say about prevention, and we heard about this at the briefing, is we need to figure out better ways to target our prevention dollars. Who are the households that are most likely to end up homeless? And how do we ensure that they're getting prevention before that happens? So that's going to require us to do some deeper dive on the data and do some predictive analytics.
And thank you for that, and thank you for the direction that you're taking. It is incredibly important. You know where my passion lies when it comes to this, and so you've hit all the salient points. Let me just ask, though, from a money perspective, do we have the money, and are there people who are waiting for us, or are we providing money for everybody that we need to be able to give them the assistance necessary to keep them where they are?
On the prevention side, I would say yes.
Okay, great. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. So with that set up, I'll turn it over to Ms. McMillan to walk us through the packet.
This is the Fed HHS Committee number 3, which is actually the DHHS budget for services to end and prevent homelessness. And for FY19, just as an overview, there's $24.257 million recommended for services to end and prevent homelessness. This is an increase of about 6.3%. Page 2 of your memo shows you the changes in various programs, and I would say that some of this comes from reassigning funds within the service area to place more of an emphasis on the prevention and diversion, and see if we can't work more to get families and individuals to prevent them from homelessness. Pages 2 and 3 really just provide you with overview of each of the program areas and the dollars and the FTEs associated with this. And then I will just walk you through a couple things. In many cases, the changes are included in multi-program adjustments, and as you've probably already experienced in other budgets that you're reviewing, these multi-program adjustments are a little dense. They're not super transparent all the time, but they are the net of compensation changes, turnover, things, readjustments actually that occurred during the course of FY19, as well as if there are increases or decreases to contract changes. So it is a net number of kind of all of these things that happened. So I wish I could give you more detail, but there's a little denseness to these. But in Homeless Family Services, they only have multi-program adjustments. You'll see in this case, there's a reduction in FTEs, and when we get later, you'll see in a different area where there is a big increase in FTEs. So again, this is that change. In Service Area Administration, which is the chiefs, again, this is a multi-program adjustment. The FTE actually showing in this budget is associated with an executive administrative aide. And then also during the course of FY19, there was a deputy position that was approved and filled to assist with moving forward with the efforts. On the top of page 4, in the permanent housing, unless, I don't know if you just want to have it, unless somebody objects.
Yes, that is where I'd like to go. Let's keep going, and if any of my colleagues have any objections or questions or comments, we'll jump in at those appropriate times. Thank you.
Okay. So then on page 4, in the permanent housing, there actually is $1 million, and it is added into this program. And I am recommending approval. I do think that even though it's titled Permanent Supportive Housing, that I do think there should be a little discussion just to make sure that it's not, my understanding is it is not like absolutely restricted to permanent supportive housing. It's $1 million of resources to support what we're doing in the system, both to help with the sustainability of people that we've already housed, housing new people potentially in permanent supportive housing, but that there is some flexibility around the types of housing that could be used with this funding if funding is available. So I just wanted to clarify that. I mean, I do think it's an appropriate amount of additional resources to put in. I think, again, and I actually wanted, referencing your first discussion, this is the kind of money that can either be in DHHS or it can be in the Housing Initiative Fund, right? It can be either place. So again, when we talk about sort of how much is in the Housing Initiative Fund, there's funds in other places that contribute to our overall effort. Either place is effective. It doesn't really matter, but it can be in either place. So I just didn't know if you just wanted to make a little bit of comment about that.
So this money was specifically approved for the purpose of permanent supportive housing to sustain the efforts of the chronic initiatives. So it's not as if we've ended, that we're never going to have anyone experiencing chronic homelessness again. So this is to address the folks that may become chronic if we wait long enough to house them. So they have this significant service needs but don't meet the length of time. So we want to be able to get them into PSH before that happens. And that's why we voted at the ICH to prioritize the new, if there's new HUD funding available for rapid rehousing to address the needs of the family.
And so given the questions my colleagues have been asking about the different types of housing to support the different types of subpopulations, is this going to aid in creating more opportunities? Or the expansion that ICH is undergoing in the next year or two?
Yes, this is specifically to sustain our efforts on chronic. So it will be for people with very significant service needs in permanent supportive housing.
Thanks. Councilmember Girondo.
Thank you, and thank you for the explanation. So, just looking at the packet here, $25,000 per person, the estimate, and then so that would be 40 people. There's 11 chronically right now or so. I know you said you were hoping for 10 this week, but, so just explain, it seems like, and the question I'm asking, as you answer that part, is there a way to, can I take $500,000 of this and put it in the HIF? You know, I mean, like, do you need, if I'm doing my math, you know what I mean? What do you suspect for next year? And just Do you need that whole amount, is my question?
Yes, we need
Okay.
that full
All
amount.
right.
So although there are 11 people that are identified right now, and they actually all have housing resources, that's not why they're not housed. It's more complicated than that. But we have, I believe, it's around 90 people right now on our coordinated entry list that have a high enough score on that assessment that they would, if we don't do anything and we let them age in, if we just keep them in shelter on the streets, they're going to become chronic.
Got it, okay,
The conversation we just had for the last half hour underscored the need for this funding.
yeah,
Yeah, okay.
perfect, then let's keep it.
Okay. The next issue is the elimination of the handicap rental assistance general fund supplement. The HHS committee will talk about other supplements in the next few days as well, but this is one of the areas where the county has used general funds for a supplement for specific purposes. This provides $150 per month to eligible clients that are housed in community-based permanent, and I'm going to call it permanent and supported housing, and I think this is one of the issues around this particular effort for people with disabilities, including mental illness. You do have information in here about how much has been used and the number of clients served. I did have a conversation because you did receive testimony from providers, and I just wanted to say that I think one of the issues around this particular program is that I understand actually the issue from the Services to End and Prevent Homelessness system, because these folks actually are not generally, there might be a few, but generally what has to happen is it's somebody who's been in residential rehab, they've been in a facility, they're not homeless, and then our partners have acquired community-based housing for those folks who their condition improves to a point where they can be in the community, and then they move into community-based housing. And so one of the questions that came up is, well, they don't come in through the coordinated entry system. And so part of the reason for that is that, at least for a couple of the providers, funding that they received to purchase the homes and the apartments that they have for this community-based housing actually say that you have to come through this residential rehab system. So even though I think you also heard comment, like, we can't always fill our bedrooms, and then the question is, well, gosh, we have all these people, right? So why can't we fill our bedrooms? So I think this is I think there's sort of two issues to try to figure out with this, which is, one, can we advocate for what changes we might need from the state on underlying rules for this housing to see if people can come in through the coordinated entry system if they're coming from the homeless system and not directly through residential rehab. But I also think that we are, in this case, I'll focus on the behavioral health side. The goal is to have people live in the least restrictive setting and in a community setting once they're able to. And this is a resource that is associated with sustaining that housing. So I am actually recommending that you put the funding back on the reconciliation list and that you not take this reduction. And then I think we do need to work on whether we can change some of the rules around how the spaces are used. And actually, and if we can't, if we come back, next year the same time, assuming that you all fund this, then it would be a question of, is this something that's more appropriate to be in behavioral health and crisis services than it is to be in services to end and prevent homelessness? Because we want to be very focused on using the coordinated entry system, and we want to be really clear what resources are available through that coordinated entry system.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Albornoz.
So I know putting together these budgets is difficult, and you have to pick the least worst options oftentimes. I do agree with the council staff recommendation here. This funding does fall into that gray area, and this does buy us some time to address the systemic issue, to work with the state, but in the meantime, holding our providers as harmless as we can. So I do support the staff recommendation on this.
Councilmember Friedson? No? Someone's light, ghost light. Okay. Was it you, Hans? No? Okay.
There's your light.
It's my light. No, there was one that came on and off. Okay. I agree with that recommendation as well. Any objections to making that recommendation? Okay. Thank you.
And then there are multi-program adjustments as well, and you'll see again FTEs are shifted. So then in the next category of homeless single adult services, we have the funding of $83,000 to provide enhanced security at Progress Place. And I think you have, I'll just let this go to other comments. It is for security staffing at the building. And so I just want to be clear that that's what the $83,000 is for.
Absolutely. And I will say that in the first 4 months of serving on this council, I've been to Progress Place 3 times. I've seen the issues internally and externally, and also those issues related to members of the community. And I don't live too far from there, and so I've heard from residents, but I know that the District 5 council member has been working on these issues as well, so I'll turn it over to Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. Lead, Acting Chair, Your Grace. I've been catching up on my Game of Thrones.
Seriously, all right.
Not sure, but anyway, thank you for allowing me to join you for this very important discussion. And I hope you all received the love letter I sent you all on Monday. Sorry, it's not in the packet, requesting additional support for security. You all are experts on Progress Place. It's an essential county facility, staffed by indefatigable, talented staff from Shepherd's Table and Interfaith Works that are here. Thank you for your hard work, delivering essential services to the most vulnerable residents of our community. There has never been enough security at Progress Place, going back to the initial setup of Progress Place. Now we have some part-time security there, but it's inadequate. And so I wanted to join you today because I feel strongly, and I'm sure you agree, that we all have a responsibility to make sure this essential county facility and its personnel there are safe and feel supported as well. I want to give you just a little bit of context. This isn't just about Progress Place, but Progress Place is a key hub in the security environment in this neighborhood at the sort of intersection of East Silver Spring and South Silver Spring. We have a growing, rising problem with crime and security in this area. And some of that may be due to Progress Place clients, some of it may be due to associates of folks there, or folks that are just attracted to the services there. Remember, we're on the edge of the District of Columbia as well. Regardless of all the different drivers, there is we've had staff at Progress Place inside the building and also problems outside the building facing not just verbal assaults, but verbal abuse, but assaults and threats involving weapons as well. And this is in a larger context in the southern half of downtown Silver Spring, where we just have rising street crime right now. And you all are part of the solution, but I don't think you can provide the whole solution. I want to talk to you about that. We have had a highly competent group of residents looking into this problem for months, and I know you all, this is not new to you. All of us and the last county executive and the current county executive received a letter back in October signed by 19 civic associations, business owners, and others, nonprofit staff, asking for help with security at Progress Place. This issue came up repeatedly at the county executive's listening sessions before his inauguration. I've had numerous meetings with the chamber, with individual business owners, with the 3rd District Police, especially Commander Montgomery, around these issues, and countless conversations with the Regional Service Director. Everybody agrees it's a big issue that needs council and county executive leadership. And it's really a multifaceted approach that we need. We've been talking to DOT about lighting under the CSX bridge there over Georgia Avenue. We have been talking about the need for public bathrooms so folks aren't defecating and urinating in Georgia Avenue or the sidewalks there. We've been talking about the need for safe gathering space so clients and others have somewhere to smoke and sit and gather where they're not panhandling and harassing people on the street, et cetera. And overall need for additional human services. And I'll tell you, I'll certainly go to the Public Safety Committee and ask for additional public safety and police resources in Silver Spring as well. And we've had businesses like Denizens offer picnic tables and other services, but nobody wants any of those pieces in place until we have additional security and safety in place. So where are we? I wrote to the county executive back in December to ask for a supplemental on this score. I appreciate the county executives put in $83,000 to expand the hours of the security. I don't know, Erica or Pofin, if you have any
additional details on how that's going to be spent.
I can actually follow up with the HHS analyst. I'm covering for him today, but I can provide a
Great.
response at a later.
Thank you. And I've talked to the CAO about this, and I know there's additional money in the FY19 budget that's getting applied to this. That's great. And 83,000 that was put in the 20 budget. That's a step in the right direction, but I really believe, and all the community stakeholders believe, it's inadequate. So I'm suggesting that we need, I think everybody understands we need 24/7 security around in Progress Place, in the building and able to cover outside the building as well. My suggestion, as more recommendations are coming in, as the 3rd District Commander continues to do a security assessment of that area, is for you all to suggest putting in $100,000 as a placeholder for an off-duty trained police officer, trained in crisis intervention, and $43,000 for the purchase and installation of security cameras inside and outside Progress Place. The placeholder amounts, you all know the process here, are to allow Linda to work her magic and make some phone calls and firm up the details between now and when we reconcile the budget. And finally, I would just add that I think we need a sensitive and humane crisis solution to this problem. And if we don't address it, we are going to have more and more people recommending the wrong approach. I've had business owners and residents ask why we're not issuing more citations, asking for new laws to be passed, essentially criminalizing homelessness, and asking for locking up homeless individuals, and that's not the direction I at least want to go in. I doubt that's where you want to go either. I really think we need to make sure our staff are safe and secure, our nonprofit partners are safe and secure, the residents there are safe and secure, and if we do that right, we won't have calls for the wrong solution as well. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing us all up to speed. I think being in the trenches as well, I think that was a very accurate description of all the conversations, all the community partners, many of whom are here today, residents, nonprofits. You mentioned the chamber as well as actively engaged, wanting to make sure that Silver Springs remain a vibrant place for the entire community. And I agree that this is the start of this must-have ongoing conversation. That it can't be resolved in this one budgetary cycle because the needs are evolving, but the needs are existing and they're deeper than even this one item that you're requesting needs. So exactly right. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. And just, Councilmember Hucker, the additional request, just so I got it, was the $43,000 for the cameras?
Yes.
And that was it? Or
43,000 for the
something
camera, 100,000 placeholder for expanded security hours.
else? Right, got it.
And I've talked to
Beyond the-
police leadership about the need to have that be an actual trained Montgomery County police officer, not contract security.
Got it. Yeah, which
Will
is
create
a problem.
turnover problems and training
Right.
problems.
And I was just at Progress Place with this week or last week, they all run together, but I know that issue in particular is of the level of capability and the affordability of the staff, of the security staff that's a critical point.
Trained in crisis
Someone,
intervention.
who knows what they're.
Sensitive to the need of the clients.
I agree 100%. Very supportive of this funding. I think your proposal makes a lot of sense as a placeholder. Obviously, we have to reconcile everything. I also just want to mention the other, since we have our colleagues here, obviously the maintenance issues with the building itself and the capacity issues, which I would love you to address, but, I just think, to be such a young building, we really didn't do what we needed to do to build it out properly for the need in that area. Obviously, 1,000 times better than old Progress Place, which I've had been to many times. But I'd love your thoughts on long-term on, I think a lot of people don't know, like if you have a really cold winter night, they're throwing these mats on the floor and people are like sleeping in the hallway. And it's not a very big space. And so the need to really expand long-term, in addition to all the things we're talking about, I just want to tee up that we have other serious challenges to addressing this, and I just would love to know how you guys are approaching that.
So there are a couple different things that we've been doing on this front. Certainly the experience we've had in that building is, if we were to do a partnership like that again, there are some things that we would do differently, having had this particular experience. So we've been in conversation both with the providers who are there every day serving clients, as well as DGS, who is tasked with doing a lot of the repair work there. And we've actually been working on a more comprehensive list of what are the things that we'd like to do there. Obviously, we've had some conversation about security. Security in this particular case actually comes on two different fronts. There's the question of personnel who are there, which is what this 83,000 is for. As you had referenced, we're actually going to be starting that sooner. So I've been in conversation with Interfaith Works, and as soon as kind of I know what exactly the ask is for the next, what hours, how much of that's inside, how much outside. I've been in contact with the police already. We're ready as soon as we have that. So there's the personnel side of that, but there are actually also a number of facility issues themselves that impinge upon security, right? And so as we've talked about the facility, both kind of maintenance, usability of the facility, as well as security issues come into that. So that does include things like cameras. It includes things like making sure the front door closes automatically. We've actually talked about like smoking and creating a smoking room, the possibility of creating a smoking room inside the building. Because part of what happens at that facility is that anytime you are now requiring a lot of movement in and out of the building, then that impinges upon how the building functions and how the security profile of the building looks. And so we have approached that question of facilities across a number of different areas. So we've been, like I said, in contact with the providers. We've been in contact with DGS. We are still in the process of getting cost estimates for that array of potential ideas. Once that's available, obviously, our next step is to sit down with the second floor and with OMB to go over what those are, and then talk about potential funding strategies for those. So that is where we are with that. We've taken, like I said, a kind of a more comprehensive look at that encompasses both security aspects of facility as well as usability aspects of the facility.
Thank you, and keep us obviously in the loop as how we can support. I think, as Councilmember Glass said, this is a larger discussion. There's more need. I couldn't agree more with Councilmember Hucker, and I think we need to emphasize we do not want to take any steps towards criminalization and fees and fines. People need a place to gather, and we are all that point in time, all that decreased homelessness, all the stuff that we're doing. People have to have somewhere to be and be in community, and that's a great part of Montgomery County. And so we want to make sure we're doing this in a way that is acknowledging that. So I agree with that, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
With regard to the physical infrastructure, certainly deficiencies, which everyone is pointing to, and lessons learned for next time we create a facility like this or enter into a partnership to create a facility like this. Time check for my colleagues, almost 11:25, and Fed has another committee, another meeting. With that, Councilmember Rice.
Very quickly, I completely agree. I support the initiative by Councilmember Hucker, but let me just say that I don't think our problems are going to go away from that. If we look at the structure of Goody Drive Men's Shelter, it's a campus. And that campus allows for folks to have places to walk around, to congregate, to talk to each other, those kinds of things. At Progress Place, originally, it was set back from the street. And so while people congregated in the parking lot area, all those kinds of things, it was far enough away from everything else that it didn't create that conflict. Because Progress Place is so close to the sidewalk and so close to frontage, that's the issue, is that it spills over. And if folks don't want to get hit by cars coming in and out, all those kinds of things, where else do you go but to the sidewalk? And that's not going to get fixed by a security guard. It's not going to get fixed by fixing a door, all those kinds of things. It's a structural issue with how we set up the campus of Progress Place. I mean, even a bench or two isn't going to solve the problem. You've got way too many people that are there. And when my daughter and I were there, around Thanksgiving time last year. I noticed it as I was coming in, and you're trying to avoid people that are hanging out in the parking lot. And then so everybody spills over into the sidewalk because that's the only place to be to hang out if you don't want to stay in the shelter indoors on a beautiful day like today, which is what we expect. And so when you go to Goody Drive's campus and you see folks are constantly walking around, and there are places where folks can walk, and that unfortunately is the challenge that's there, and it's just the way it was set up. And so from that perspective, I completely support, but I think we're going to definitely have to come back to this and come up with some sort of other kind of solution that involves us looking at our parking lot and looking at how that space can be utilized not only for parking, but also for a congregation area, because if not, it's going to continue to push people out. I will just say that when you look at some of the other areas, and I know it's permanent supportive housing, so it's different, but our places in Bethesda, right? It's very different, and so folks are able to then go out and go around, and so it really is one where I'm curious also, because I see some of our clients that are in downtown Bethesda at other places, and they're very interactive with folks, but not from a negative standpoint. I want to say that I know a couple of our clients because my wife has her business in downtown Bethesda, and so I see them all the time as I'm going down there, but they're great. And so the question is, how do we have the difference between them? So part of it is staffing in terms of making sure that we can set expectations for our constituents as well, to make sure that they understand how we want them to interact with the public, because it then affects them. And because if folks are saying negative things about them and having negative interactions, that puts further pressure on us when it comes to, and that's why you have the chamber discussions and all those kinds of things. So a lot of things compacted in there that I think we're going to have to address from a very different issue. I do firmly support this, but this is just a Band-Aid on the real problem that's going to continue to exist.
And as part of that ongoing conversation, the outdoor spaces for a congregation, if it's not the parking lot and it's not Georgia Avenue, it is a small parcel of land that will soon become the Capitol Crescent Trail. So individuals are being squeezed out of that outdoor space. Councilmember Albornoz.
Appreciate the thoughtful and compassionate way we are trying to address a very complex issue that has obviously a lot of layers. Have also met with members of the community and business leaders who've been very thoughtful as well and compassionate in their approach, but I certainly understand and recognize the urgency. So I certainly support the amendment or the additional funding proposed by my colleague, Councilmember Hucker. As a member of the Public Safety Committee, along with my colleague, Councilmember Hucker, just want to say publicly, I will also support an expansion of efforts in policing in District 5 as well, for all the reasons he's so eloquently articulated. So, thank you.
I also had that in my note, wanting to express appreciation for continuing this conversation in the Public Safety Committee as well. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I also support the initiative. My only question is it necessarily police staff or is it security? Are we making a determination at this point? Mr. Hucker, do you feel strongly that this is a police officer? You mentioned you had some concerns about training, and if we didn't have it as a police officer, position as a police officer, could you just?
Can I actually jump in on that? So the conversation that I've had with Mike Gordy and the other folks in the police department, I do want to draw a distinction between merit staff who are part of the security portion of the police department versus a uniformed officer.
Okay.
Those are not necessarily the same things, but
Here in
there's.
this building, at the entrance is merit staff, not a uniformed officer.
And that is the distinction that it is my understanding that we're drawing here, that having someone who's merit staff, who has additional training, who has, now for the external question.
They do have a uniform.
That may be different.
I'm not talking about the individuals who man the X-ray, No, that's contract. That's a contract security.
Right, so we're talking about county merit staff who are part of the security portion of the police department.
Okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case, and my understanding from discussions with police leadership as well is their preference, two things. One, somebody that has crisis intervention training that our police officers are provided, and we'll treat those, we'll treat those sort of situations, with sensitivity and compassion, but also too, somebody that is going to stay in the job for a long time and not be a contract security officer who then may leave at any time, even after we train them, for a better job, a better paying job. We want somebody who's going to be in this for the long haul.
Thanks. The key there is someone trained in crisis intervention to work with that population on an ongoing basis. Absolutely. Any other thoughts or comments on this? Any objections to adding these two items?
I actually need a motion because Mr. Hucker's not a member.
By Albornoz and seconded by Councilmember Reamer. All those in favor? Unanimous? Thank you all. Thank you. And thank you to those in the audience, the ongoing advocacy of the community leaders who've taken up this issue over the last number of years and waiting for elections and other geopolitics here in Rockville to settle down before we can take action. So thank you. Ms. McMillan, back to you.
We're at the bottom of page 5. There is a recommendation to reduce funding related to the Youth Drop-In Center. Councilmember Glass has discussed this. The plan is to coordinate with the center that's being developed for the re-engagement center for youth. And so the HHS committee will take this up when they do Children, Youth, and Family Services, so that you can hear from Ms. Barnes and the Collaboration Council on the full plan and understand how that works.
All
So
those
we're not doing
partners,
that
right.
today. Right. And then there's multi-program adjustments. The other information in prevention, I just wanted to say this is where the work years have gone. You were having this discussion about like how are we working on prevention? And so there are resources now that have moved there from the prior budget. And I don't know if you wanted to hear a little about that. And then I would just say there's information in the packet. I don't know timing-wise how much you want to talk about this today, but on the energy assistance that happens through HHS services to end and prevent homelessness. But I think you might want to hear about just the reallocation of work years and effort around prevention, since you mentioned that earlier. Amanda?
So the addition of the FTE is largely just a product of the reorganization.
Right.
There was an additional 5 FTE added. However, these are not new services. So these are employees that work in the Office of Home Energy. Previously, they were broker positions. We received funding from the state to actually convert those into merit positions. So it's not actually a bigger workforce.
Right, and the brokers themselves had been funded under House bill through this, by the states. This was an increase that allowed us to actually make that conversion.
Correct.
So it's all consistent, same set of services.
State funding made it possible. Great. Okay.
And then we have received money, so there's an update for you.
Ms. McMillan, hold on one sec. Councilmember Rice.
Just very quickly, and you guys know my passion about MEEP and energy assistance. Typically, I'm asking to put more money in, but I noticed you said that it's projected to decline. What do you attribute that to, and what are the tea leaves that are signaling that we'll have a decline in terms of requests for energy assistance?
In general, people are doing better. It's all guesswork, though. We don't know.
Okay. Because I know that from my office, I always tell you about how that's one of Daniela's #1 calls that come in. And again, as we prevent or try and prevent people from becoming homeless, that's always one of the things that I'm always cognizant about. It's normally some sort of utility payments that start the process. And then from there, then they shift their money from paying for their rent to paying for the utilities to get the utilities turned back on, and then they start getting behind in the rent. So that's the typical thing that we see. Yep.
Right, and we provide assistance for utilities under the broader housing stabilization umbrella. So there are a number of avenues for that, but in general, as the economy improves, people become more stable across a number of fronts. And as you referenced, people do end up making choices about what goes first. And so as people become more stable, that's something that comes back quicker, so,
As long as you guys feel confident in that, then I'm not going to touch it.
Two final items?
And so then there is, like I say, there is information also on the Energy Coach Program, which was funded through the Pepco Exelon settlement. Then in diversion, there's just multi-program adjustments. And then in healthcare for the homeless, the budget only shows multi-program adjustments. I would say that the Montgomery Cares Advisory Board in the package of requests that they've presented they have one ask around healthcare for the homeless, which is to have funding for home health aides. This relates to the discussions you just had about more people that are older and have disabilities. I'm recommending that you just approve the executive's budget, but I would like to talk further with the department to see if we might be able to reallocate some funding, because encounters are actually a little down. So if there is some money that could be freed up, we could try a pilot through just reallocating money as opposed to having put money on the reconciliation list.
Well, and for just perspective, having spoken with advocates and board members of Montgomery Cares, the funding is to help those individuals who are falling through the cracks with Medicare and Medicaid, and so providing them that additional safety net. And I'm fine taking staff recommendation?
Yep.
Without objection, okay?
That's
Excellent. Great. That concludes. Thank you all. Thank you.
And then